Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight in the Black Rock Castle Observatory YouTube channel. You may have seen the recent image that's been dubbed Talking Heads in the paper and on social media as well. And this image was taken during the mask research project. So you had two medical dummy heads in conversation with each other, one masked, one not masked. So we're going to get into that tonight. We're going to get into it in some good detail. And if this is your first time joining us here, make sure you click that subscribe button, because once you're subscribed to our channel, then are we actually live? Oh yeah, we go. Yeah, so if this is your first time here, make sure that you are clicking the subscribe button, because once you're subscribed to the channel, you'll be notified when we post new videos, and you'll also know when we're doing live events like this one, so that you don't miss out and you can participate as well. Because during our live chats, we also have, or our live streams, we have a live chat. So if you have questions about anything that comes up during this conversation, make sure you put it in the chat, and we'll be able to answer them live for all of your questions live for you here. Now, with the mask research project, hold on one second here. Just want to make sure that, there we go. There we go. So now with the mask research project, this was a combined effort between the Cork Institute of Technology, CIT, the Center for Advanced Photonics and Process Analysis, which is CAPPA, and Black Rock Castle Observatory, which is BCO. So you can we are really into acronyms here. So MASK from the Mask Research Project actually stands for Making Aerosol Safety Known. So I'd like to introduce the members of the team that we have joining us here tonight. I have Dr. Niall Smith, who is the head of research at CIT, and also the head of Black Rock Castle Observatory as well, and the lead on the MASK project. Niall's research focuses on space topics, including ultra-high precision photometry, and uses small satellites in low Earth orbit for a wide range of functions, from high resolution imaging to space cybersecurity to rural broadband, space things. So that we'll talk about how that applies to the project a little later on. I also have Dr. Liam Lewis with us tonight. Liam's the center head for CAPPA in CIT. He oversees all operations within CAPPA and works strongly towards building industry and academic partnerships for the group. And joining Dr. Liam Lewis is Dr. Stephen Darby from CAPPA as well. He's a researcher at CAPPA CIT and is currently working on a wide variety of industry projects. He has previously worked in pharma and medtech and atmospheric research. And Stephen is part of the team that has been and is still continuing to get images from the MASK project. And we also have Alan Gilton in here, who is a co-founding member of CIT Black Rock Castle Observatory. And Alan started out in the pharmaceutical industry before moving into education and research. And within both astronomy and instrumentation research, he has multiple internationally peer-reviewed publications, conference proceedings, and a book chapter. And maybe most importantly, the resident astrophysicist at Black Rock Castle Observatory. Along with me, I am a resident astronomer and telescope operator at Black Rock Castle Observatory in Cork here, and a coordinator for Space Week Ireland. My main role on the project for the MASK project was is communication with the public and explaining how the techniques from astrophysics can be used to aid in the prevention of the spread of COVID-19, and to illustrate why interdisciplinary research is so important, which is why this group here has come together. So firstly, I'd like to get into the project itself. So now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Smith here. Niall, can you start off by telling us a little bit more about the background on the project and tell us how this whole thing all came together?
Yeah, Danielle. So I think it's a really interesting, it's really interesting because it's a bit different, maybe the way this project was initiated. So we also kind of cast our minds back to earlier this year, maybe February time and so on. We started to get this sense that there was something brewing and that there was a lot of problems in countries, not really in Ireland at that time, but that it was kind of coming in this direction. And we knew there was something called COVID-19. And for those of us, all of us on this team, I think I'm correct in saying we don't have any medical background per se, so we're all physicists. by background. So we're looking at this virus, and in the first instance, you're kind of thinking, well, that's for the medical people to deal with. And so you're looking at how it's moving around. A lot of commentary about the way that it might be transmitted on surfaces. So you probably remember that as we moved into lockdown on the 12th of March earlier this year, there was a lot of talk about making sure that when you went shopping, you washed your shopping and so on. And we all became very concerned about hand hygiene and touching our face, etc., etc. And those things remain important to a point, but we can chat about that during this evening. But we decided in CIT that because COVID-19 was very much an unknown but hugely impactful problem, that we would put together a team which we call the COVID-19 Research Solutions Team. And the idea was that we would bring a bunch of people from across the college. In the first instance, that's what we started within CIT. And we would look to see if we just brainstorm together who had an idea, how we could take what we knew in CIT to help to prevent COVID-19 having a negative impact. So there was really, it wasn't even about transmission at that stage. It wasn't about any, it was just, has anybody got any idea here that we, so we came up with a bunch of different ideas. One of the ideas that we started looking at, which sounds so obvious now, and I keep on saying to people, you know, imagine 6 months ago, because right now it's kind of obvious. But what actually happened, one of the, I think the interesting things that happened was that the Pat Kenny show on News Talk every day was talking about COVID-19. And he interviewed a guy from the Czech Republic. And in the Czech Republic, this guy was saying, well, we're all making masks. You know, we've got people in their farmhouses, people in their homes, whatever, they're all making masks. And we have basically really no COVID much at all. And I thought, actually, that sounds interesting. And I wonder, so we start to do a little background reading, and you start to look at it and you think, okay, others have talked about using masks for other flus. You know, I'm still not a big person, by the way. So for other viruses, you kind of think, okay, that's really interesting. So one day I said to the guys, look, here's an idea, masks. And it kind of went down like a lead balloon initially, because most of the commentary at the time was about what we call now these, I learned the word fomite, which is and basically something maybe goes out of your mouth and it spreads on the table and it can be moved by touching and so on. But in fairness, although I said it went down like a lead balloon, I'm obviously in jest, because, you know, being scientists, people started to say, well, okay, well, you know, tell us some more now, or we're going to look some more or whatever. So the following week, we had all looked a little bit more, and a few people then started to say, well, actually, that's interesting. What this guy in the Czech Republic is saying, maybe there's something in that and so on. So anyway, now I will cut a bit shorter, but I think what's interesting about the start is you almost have this randomness about listening to something on the radio. Then it just sparks an idea. We just happen to be all talking to one another at the time. So that encouraged that idea to move around various different brains with different views and different opinions, which strengthened the idea, of course. And then Science Foundation Ireland released this call, I don't remember the exact sequence, for rapid responses. It's called the COVID-19 Rapid Response Call. And the idea was we need to try to solve issues around this really quickly if we can. So we decided that we would put in an application. And one of the things, just coming to a conclusion, because this is beginning to sound like a monologue, but one of the things that we had thought early on as well, those of us in the astrophysics side of the house, so to speak, was when we looked at some of the images in the literature, we noticed that they looked like when people spoke and some people had a laser beam. When they went through the laser, you could see these dots. And we said, well, that looks very like stars. And we're pretty good at measuring the brightness of stars because that's what we do as astrophysicists. So we threw in this idea that in the proposal, we would say we would measure the brightness of the droplets. And we try to see how many of different sizes there were, because that was probably of interest to the people who do understand viruses. So we were never intending to become virologists or whatever direct ourselves. So that was that started the process. And that was really kind of where the proposal went, which was we were going to measure the brightness of the different droplets and try to figure out from that how many were important. So the idea initially, and then we'll let the conversation move around now, but the idea initially was, well, maybe there'll be lots of big ones and very few small ones, or lots of small ones and very few big ones, or whatever it might be. And maybe the small ones won't be so important, maybe the big ones won't be so. So we're thinking, well, we don't really know what's important, so let's try to measure. If you don't know what's going to be important, you try to measure it. And so in the exact right way that science should work, we said, we put in the proposal which says we have a technique which we don't think others are using because we couldn't find it in the literature, which would allow us to measure the droplets in a slightly unique way. Now, the story actually evolves, so there's a lot of evolution between now and the picture, by the way, but that's kind of where we started. So in terms of the background, when we started off, that was going to be our initial focus, was in looking for the size of these droplets that would be emitted as people talked and spoke through masks of different materials, because we thought if everybody is going to be using masks, then we really need to know, is this piece of material good, bad, or indifferent? I mean, it's everywhere. It's in all the homes. We don't have to bring it in from abroad. It's just in people's houses. Could they make good masks out of material that was lying around? That was kind of the thinking behind the early part of this, was stuff that was like, because we had a lot of concerns about PPE and was there enough PPE and it was needed. We said, well, let's not use PPE. Let's just use bits of cloth and let's figure out how good they are. There had been some work, my final comment for the opening, there had been some work done in the literature, so I wouldn't want to be disrespectful to the work that had been done on materials. We just thought we could move along what was known, and I think that's good science. You try to move along. Rarely are you starting out where nobody has thought anything to do with what you're addressing. It's usually you're trying to move along the state of the art rather than establish completely a whole new state of the art. So sometimes that happens, but that isn't what we were trying to do. So that's kind of the background 101 as to how we submitted the proposal, and it got funded, and next stuff happened after that.
I absolutely love the story because I love the fact that it was just that spark of inspiration from maybe kind of a random place. And I know that you are very big about watching the news and all of that. So, but hearing a conversation on the radio like that, and then it's snowballed into something larger, I think it's a really interesting. I think a lot of times people just think, oh, science just happens in the lab and that's it. But no, there's things that happen outside the lab that carry into the kind of.
And can I just say, I think it's credit to good journalism. Pat interviewed a lot of people. In particular, I mean, there are others as well. You can't listen to every radio station, but I got to listen to that a lot because he interviewed lots of people with evidence-based views. Not always the same view, by the way. It wasn't that. It wasn't a filtered view. But you could kind of listen to that and think, yeah, that those people, I disagree with them for this reason, or I agree with them, but they're trying to make good sense. And I think there was a lot of powerful commentary, good journalism, and good journalism helped us, I would say. And I think we should. So when you talk about science and society and all the rest, they should work together. This was an example, I think, of that actually working in practice. So credit to Pat Kenny and to News Talk for trying to bring a scientific approach to the discussion from it really quite early on.
Which is actually really important because a lot of times some of this stuff gets very technical, and it's, for a lot of the public, it might just be like, oh, I'm going to tune out there because it's just, I'm not understanding it. How does this relate to me? This project, I think, is really a good illustration of how this does relate to real world problems and really affects the general public. So I do want to get into the actual experiment itself. And Alan and I were chatting earlier and saying that there really is two major parts of the project. And so you have your data acquisition and then your data analysis. I just want to check to make sure that we have Liam still. Is he still there? Are you there, Liam? Maybe he's trying to reconnect.
Yeah,
he's still there. Okay, perfect.
Maybe
okay,
my video might be
all
right.
Sorry,
yeah.
Hopefully you'll be able to reconnect.
The joys of a rural broadband connection.
Okay. Well, Niall might be able to help you out with that.
Low Earth orbit satellites, Liam. We have to get them on board pretty quick so we can get you a reliable broadband. That's for another night's discussion. But
yeah, so actually, because I wanted to go over to Liam and Stephen about this part, and it is the data acquisition side. So collecting the images, collecting the data that you need, and the experiment itself. Kind of go through. Can you break down what the experiment is? And Niall, like the laser and maybe into it. Are you there, Liam? Oh, I think he might be breaking up. Stephen, I think I'll let you take this part here. Yeah, can you just talk about the experiment itself? Talk about what's actually happening in the experiment, and how do you go about conducting it?
Sure, can you hear me?
Can hear you, Liam. You're still breaking up a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm here in the lab and I can show you exactly what we were doing with the photo. So what I have in front of me here, we're on an optical bench, and this is the dummy we used. He has a type 2 surgical mask on at the moment. And this type of dummy is used in medical training for teaching students how to intubate patients. So it's actually made, the inside of his airways is very accurate to a human. And the lower side of his chest, I'll show you here. He actually has a stomach and a pair of lungs you can use, and all the other same apparatus and vocal cords inside that give a realistic impression of what it's like to work on a human. So we borrowed this dummy for this project, and we've adapted it by swapping out one of the lungs for this nebulizer. And that nebulizer is essentially making an aerosol that is fairly similar to the one that you would be breathing in your breath if you're even at rest doing nothing, or if you're talking, you'd be producing a bit more aerosol. So once that goes inside, we can then give him breaths with this other lung and see what the effect is on the mask. And the lasers I will show you now, we'll just get them fired up. So you want to see what happens?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Go for it.
Let's first switch on. This is a blue laser. So this is actually in the shape of a cone. You see where I trace out the finger, it's going around his mouth and not touching the center. So when the aerosol crosses that line, you'll see it glow very brightly. And I have another laser here. This one is a red sheet, which is flat like this. It's coming straight down the center line. And you'll see that much more clearly once I turn this on. So I'm going to switch off the main light here. Let's turn on the nebulizer. So you see here, it's hard to see. There's so much aerosol, but let me just take off the mask so you can see it coming out. Give him a breath.
Yeah, you can really see it.
Mm-hmm. See all that aerosol pumping out. And I have an extractor fan on just above his mouth. But even with that extraction on, you still see how much the aerosol is dispersing in the air. And this slight drift here, that's just from the natural movement in the air, turned all the ventilation systems off here in the lab. It doesn't need to be, you don't need to be in a windy place for the aerosol to move. It really travels around by itself quite easily.
So this would be the same as just having, if someone was just breathing. This is no mask, just breathing, not like forcing air out or coughing or sneezing. This is just the same as just breathing. Just
normal breath. There's obviously a normal human breath will be a lot less aerosol than this, but it will behave in a practically identical way.
Mm-hmm.
We look very similar. And I can show you again what happens when you put the mask on. Turn on the pump again. And you see there's nothing coming straight through the top of the mask, but instead there's some escaping around the top and around the sides. Overall, the amount of aerosol that's leaking is much, much less than what it was without the mask on.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of hard to see when this is just a webcam I'm using, but in person you can really get an impression of how much less there is. It's the lasers are so sensitive here.
So this is a really important point, Stephen, isn't it? I mean, because what we're saying is that we're trying to now kind of get a sense of where the mask isn't maybe as effective as it could be. But the first point we really need to make is the difference between a mask and no mask is enormous. And the next bit of what we want to try to figure out as well, can you go from good mask to a better mask? But the key point for anybody watching is wearing the mask in the first instance is absolutely the best thing you can do, whether it's a good, bad, or indifferent mask. Shut your nose and your mouth. That's what this shows very clearly, by the way. And Stephen has done a really good job in showing that. But there's another bunch of stuff to go on. Stephen, you might also just say how in a way this came about in the lab, because this isn't what we said we'd start out with. And I think that's another strength of part of this project and good science is observing something, sharing the idea and realizing that maybe this is telling us something which we hadn't anticipated in the original proposal. I mean, that's really good to stuff. But ideally, if you know everything you want to find in the original project, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but this is, I think, really exciting. So Stephen, you might just kind of maybe mention a few words about that.
Originally, we were only going to look at natural aerosol from people's breath and directly measure that in the effect that a mask would have on how much of that aerosol was absorbed or captured by the mask. And we found quite rapidly that this isn't a clean room environment in this lab. It's fairly clean as far as labs go. But the background level of aerosol was so high that it was hard to detect what was coming out of people's mouths. And that's been the case for a lot of other studies where they've been looking at masks, is the background emission, even from the masks themselves, is quite high, especially cotton or natural fibers. Every time you move it, they release a lot of fibers themselves. And in some places, you can't tell whether the particles you're seeing came from the mask or they're emitted from a person's mouth. So when we got hold of this dummy, we started just experimenting and playing around in the lab and seeing what we could see with it. And once we started pumping in aerosol into his mouth, we realized there's something funny going on here. And it's not just the aerosol that's leaking straight through the mask. There's also quite a lot going around the sides. And it really depends on what sort of mask you're looking at, how much is leaking around the side. Some masks are very good and some are quite bad. And that's an aspect we couldn't find that anyone else had been talking about directly. So
not only material, but then also fit. Fit's a really important thing.
So we can show you some examples, like the bandana. It's kind of become notorious as an example of something that's where the fabric is so thin you can see through it, and the amount of aerosol they capture is pretty small compared to a surgical mask, say, but because the fit around the face is so tight, you get practically no leakage. And also the way it affects the aerosol, the plume that's coming out, instead of firing directly out and going for meters and maybe more than that and traveling to where other people are, it just sticks to the surface and hardly moves away. So it's even though the fabric itself isn't filtering the aerosol, it's still going to have a big improvement on how far the droplets will spread in normal environment.
So it just starts to become more complicated as we learn more, which is great because that's always fun from a science.
Problem when you start looking at this, doing experiments, it's always more complicated than you expect.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and that's the interesting angle when going from the example of the fit where you've just demonstrated, Stephen, to the penetration of material through the mask itself becomes very important, because at some point what we do want to achieve is everyone having a mask that is properly fitted and appropriately fitted. And at that point, then the efficacy and the efficiency of the mask itself becomes particularly important. And that's where, we're looking at obviously a number of techniques, but as Niall highlighted earlier on, and just to pick up on one point, Niall, you were saying about News Talk and Pat Kenny. It would be remiss not to say behind Pat Kenny there are a number of researchers and radio researchers that actually do a fair bit of work for him. So and fair play to them, because they clearly know their stuff as well. So fair play to them for picking up on the Czech angle. So they obviously have their ear to the ground. When it comes to the actual mask material itself, what we're looking at is the particles that go through the material. So when the particles go through the material, they will penetrate that. See, the red laser that Stephen was highlighting there earlier on. They will penetrate that material. They'll excite it, and it basically comes in like a star field. So it looks like we're looking at a bunch of stars, and this is where the whole interdisciplinary angle comes in, because from our point of view, if we see a number of star-like images, we can analyze them in terms of brightness, and in brightness we can then go back towards how they look or how they are relative to the size of the particle. So in essence, how is, if it's a small particle, it'll be a certain brightness. If it's a large particle, it'll be much brighter. And we can start to make differences and understandings between them. We can start to correlate between them. So from our point of view, we have a software system that allows us to do that. So we're used to looking at totally different. We're used to looking at supermassive black holes and extrasolar planets and comets and things like that. So okay, we're used to in general looking at different things, but in essence, photometry, which is the measurement of the brightness of an object, basically number of light photons that are coming towards you, or that are in general being generated. We can measure the photometry, and in particular what we're looking for is the difference in the brightness. Because this is an important point. It's the difference in the brightness of the masks associated with the speech, for example, that we're talking about, or even through the dummy head or something like that. The difference in the brightness is what's very important. So what we're trying to understand is what Stephen was highlighted, sorry, was it a bandana or a snood? I can't remember.
Bandana.
Bandana, or one of these masks, or a different, or a tablecloth, or a tea towel, which is the better type of material to actually use. Some of them are going to be 10% better. Some of them are going to be 50% improved. Some of them are going to be 90% improved. Well, 90%, we're getting into the PPE side of things, but we're trying to figure out which of the materials that are most appropriately used, considering what's going on and what's likely to go on for quite some time. So it's very important that everyone wears a material, so and wears a face covering. So what we're trying to understand is what specific material is most appropriate to be used from a home environment. So it's a fascinating project.
It's also, and I think what Stephen just really demonstrated there is, like, you could have the best material in the world, but if it's just like here, that's not doing much. It has to be fitted really well, and so like that's such a big part of it. So it's the, I guess from Stephen's side of it, he was talking about like getting the images in, and he's been taking the images of the experiment. So Alan got into a little bit of the other side of it that I was talking about, the data analysis, where he's taking the images that Stephen is collecting and then going through them and looking at them the way we would look at stars in the images that we get through the telescope upstairs, for example. And so, yeah, and Liam, yeah, I wanted to bring you in because I know you were chopping up earlier, so you look better.
I hope you can hear me okay, but I think there's just maybe one or two kind of top level interesting points here. Is that, Niall mentioned at the start that you would have thought that from a mask and from a virus point of view that the biological sciences were going to be the ones that would initially address this issue and would say, okay, look, that's their area, what can we do? But actually, if you think about it, light as a diagnostic tool is brilliant. It interacts with everything, and there's so much, you've got such a broad range of wavelengths that you can look at in terms of how you can interpret the data that comes back. And if you think about it in its simplest form as just representing an image, and you bring it all the way up to just looking at the image that we had for the SFI project, just taking that as a representation of what you can do is really, really simple. It's really, really, demonstrative as well of what you're trying to do with the project. And, in a lot of the work that we do as well, the application of the light is, we've got to figure out how to necessarily think in a different way. You get used to using a particular diagnostic tool or a technique in a particular way because you get comfortable with it, then you get, you get good at it, and you get results. And then you get the challenge of trying to find another way of making the same application more relevant to something else. And actually, for a lot of the industry work that we do, we will use spectroscopic type techniques, which is looking at the different wavelengths and different colors, and actually applying those to a variety of different projects in, not just kind of medical areas like this in terms of mask, but pharma, food safety, food, beverage, all of those. So it's really, really interesting to think about how simple, but yet how effective the usage and analysis of light as a diagnostic tool can be.
Oh, I think it's absolutely fascinating. From day one, like the actual project itself for me was so interesting because I thought, exactly what you're saying. You taking a technique, you're looking at light from stars and then applying it to something that you wouldn't really think initially that those two would go together, but it makes a lot of sense. It really does. And it's such a simple connection, which I think is just absolutely fascinating.
Yeah,
and
the camera
Liam's
using.
Sorry, Al. Just if you think about what we know about the universe, once you really go beyond the solar system, and in fact, most of what we know, or a considerable what we know about the solar system, is really generated by detecting light. Now, the light might be at radio frequencies, it might be at frequencies that we don't see with our eye, but light has been critical to our understanding of our place in the universe as well. Astronomy wouldn't be possible if there wasn't a medium similar to light. So as a diagnostic tool, Liam is absolutely right. It probably is the key diagnostic tool available to humanity because it can span essentially pretty much any distance until you get back to a certain distance when things start to break down very close to the Big Bang. But you're basically seeing how the universe has evolved from its start right through to now, and understand how materials that universe work and the laws that govern it, because light is a diagnostic tool. So it's a really powerful. So photonics, which is what Liam and his team work on in CAPPA, and the astrophysics that we do, both are only facilitated, but so powerfully, by the existence of light and the fact that it interacts with matter, which is really important because it's the fact that it does interact so effectively.
And that includes medical now.
That's really important.
If you look at the medical sphere, if you think of, if you want to go for, an X-ray or something, there are so many tools that are used, even from a medical point of view, and continue to be through this experiment, that are used using light. Frequency dependent, but but light is such a powerful diagnostic tool. That you're absolutely right to mention that.
Perhaps even make it simpler than that. A nice thing I do with audiences who we're introducing, photonics and optics to, I'll just tell them to take a minute and close your eyes and look at all the information you lose by just closing your eyes. Your situation, your position, the items in the room, the colors, the shapes, the depth of field, all of that just goes by simply taking away the vision and the light element of it. So it's excellent that we've found these ways to marry techniques that have been around for quite a while, but are now solving new problems and doing it, I suppose, I think, and this is something that we haven't touched on, maybe doing it in a very time efficient fashion. you know, I think we're very much used to having a little bit of time to work on projects. You know, they're normally a lot longer than this, but you know, these were short-term, quick turnaround, quick result type projects that SFI wanted to fund, which was really good, by the way. I think it's you know, it helped to kind of focus the mind in terms of what you wanted to do. But you know, some of them, including our own, I would like to say, have really given us some excellent results in a really short space of time. And I think that's good credit to people who've worked on these things and who've challenged themselves to find new ways of making measurements and finding new applications for all this. So it's really, really good, and it's brought more of us together to understand what we can do as a team.
Absolutely. And if I may, because I can see Stephen is showing the particular type of camera that we're using, and Stephen, if you want to give more detail on that, well, I'm just going to lead with one particular element of it. So this is approximately the size of the camera. So just in case anyone thinks that these are, you know, it's not this type of camera.
Yeah.
Not a mobile phone.
Pretty heavy.
These are pretty sizable pieces of kit in terms of camera technology. This is one type, and Stephen has a slightly different type in his lab. Stephen, I don't know, do you want to give a brief description of the CMOS camera?
So this camera is designed for astronomy, really. The sensor in it is very big, extremely sensitive. And it's on loan to us from Andor in Belfast, who sent it down for us. And the type of housing it's in, although it uses the same astronomical sensor, it's actually designed for doing cell biology and microscopes. So I actually had to print a mount there to put it on this post to use it on the table. But the same type of sensitive camera is used in so many different fields. And now we're using it for looking at mass efficiency. I didn't ask him how much that camera costs. It's what you have to ask him. You can't afford it. It's one of the most sensitive and biggest frame sizes you can get.
And can I say it's a credit, because what we've seen as well, you know, globally, but on this project, that we have dealt both in CAPPA and at Blackrock Castle at the observatory. We've used these cameras built by Andor Technologies in Belfast, which is a spin out actually of Queen's University Belfast. So a really good example of where companies come out of academia and help solve a global pandemic issue, even at some level. We're not going to overstate what our contribution to the overall effort is, but it's an important point because so many of us are wearing masks and we only really have to understand efficacy, and we can scale up the use of the appropriate type of mask. So we're still very excited about the possibilities over the next couple of months. But as Liam said, there's some work left to be done for sure, and hopefully follow on work from that. But it's a really good example, I think, of Andor, a company putting their tuppence worth in as well and helping with the effort by giving us this camera and saying, guys, you know, if we can help you to solve a problem which is going to be a public health, help with a public health emergency, then we're happy to do so. And so I think COVID-19 has actually been really good from that. And for those who maybe also don't know, any publication pretty much, probably a few exceptions, but pretty much any publication in any journal worth its salt that has been published is published open access. Really, all the journals, if you're doing something under COVID-19, then we will make it freely available. So a lot of journals, for those who wouldn't be so familiar, you have to pay, and often pay quite handsomely to download the journal paper. And in a situation like this, you don't know where the innovation is going to come from. And what it really shows is the more you can allow information to reach as many people as possible and have as many brains thinking about it as possible. And I'm not just talking about our project. I mean, there's lots of examples of this. The more you can do that, the better. And so this kind of fully open access, very rapid, as Liam says, a quick turnaround, so that if we find it today, this is we are just hoping to publish our second paper very soon. We've already got one paper out. Now, usually you wouldn't have two papers on a project like this in a period of a few months. But it's really important for us to get the results out to the scientific community and other brains, you know, so that they can start to think about things that we can't. So a really good example of science working together for the public good. Of course, for us, we're excited, but we want to try to come up with cool ideas. That's great, but we don't want to do that at the expense of not allowing others to maybe come up with a better idea. Might be disappointed if they do, but that's the game that we're in now. We need to work together collaboratively, and we are, you know, across the planet in many ways, and any commentary to the country is unfortunate, because it's a really good time to be a scientist trying to solve a problem related to COVID.
I was going to say something kind of to that lines. I think, you know, certainly there may be some, you know, what we'll call lay people listening tonight, or will hear this later, or even just when you talk to people in general. And obviously, you know, the news in general for people, it's not good. You know, you're told stay at home, you're told you can't go places you go. But there are a lot of positive things coming out of the situation as it is, certainly from a scientific point of view. You know, we've heard recently about the vaccines, we're doing the work here on masks, but equally well, I think you'd like to show, even at a maybe simpler level, that there, you know, science has and research has a worth to it. You know, that spending money on research is a good thing. And equally well, I think you're dead right. From our point of view, and I think I probably speak for everybody here anyway, that, you know, we enjoy the work we do, and it's exciting and it's very rewarding when you get to, you know, a really positive result like this. But equally well, what I would hope it would do at all levels is encourage people to be more, I suppose, scientifically curious, you know, not to necessarily assume that you won't understand something, that you won't have an interest in it. I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff that you don't have to have, you know, all letters after your name to understand. I think there's just an interest that people can take. And what I would love to see is that maybe, you know, this type of work and others like it would encourage people to get into scientific research, because they've seen the positivity around it, because they've seen the positive results from it, and that it is really something we can say to people, you know, this is actually a very worthwhile and rewarding career to be involved in.
Absolutely, that's a very good point. And in addition, I think you know, there are a number of, for example, citizen science projects as well. So like everyone can get involved. Science is for everyone.
Yeah.
So, you know, so there's a career involved, and there's so some will go down the career path, and some will not go down the career path in terms of science. So, but science is ultimately for everyone because it's everywhere. And there are a number of citizen science projects out there as well. So I would very much encourage people, like you were saying, Liam, to get involved in science and continue to get involved in science. And to flip back to a point that you were making earlier on about the about light, what Stephen was showing in the lab, from the difference between the blue and the red lasers, and how you can differently how you can see different aspects of what's going on with the breath and so on, is fantastic. It just goes to show that if you use light in the right manner, it's fantastic. And that then leads to the likes of yourself, Danielle, in terms of generating that image, the talking heads image, which is a fantastic image. You know, what was the process involved in actually bringing that together from your point of view?
Well, it was a lot of images that were generated by you guys. So it took a while to go through them all and pick out basically what it was once I got all of the images from CAPPA and I started going through everything, I started to look at everything as a whole, and I started to figure out, for me, when I start going into like a creative side, I know I'm trying to look for a story, I'm trying to look for a message, I'm trying to look at what is being said through the images. So as I was going through, there were specific ones that were really sticking out to me, and there were about, I actually can't remember the number of images, but Stephen, you gave me a lot to work with. I'll tell you.
Over 2,000.
It was, yeah. Well, I'll say it was, yeah, it was my whole Sunday, like going through stuff. But there were specific ones that I really liked the colors of the lasers. I really liked the way that the the images themselves were presenting themselves. I didn't want to do too much in terms of manipulating the image because I wanted it to be true to what was actually happening. And so my biggest thing was, you did a great job imaging, Stephen, but in terms of like composition and like artistic messaging, I had to make sure that they were lined up very well. So it was actually a little bit tricky to find images that could face each other and look good because I took 2 of the images and it made sense to me that I wanted something that was provocative, and it was really, because it illustrated so well the difference between a mask and no mask, and I wanted those to be confrontational. That was the idea. And so I knew I wanted them kind of facing off, almost like what you see when you have like the promos for like a boxing match or something. That was kind of what I was going for. And then the trick was getting them to be at the same, like eye to eye. So some of the images were kind of off and this and that. So what I had to do was just make sure that they were facing each other and then lined up really well, and picking the right ones that would communicate that message together. So you gave me a lot of material to work with, Stephen. It was fantastic. And it just was a bit of combing through things and really making sure the message that I wanted was going into the image. So that was a bit of the process. And I do have questions here though, so I wanted to get to those. From Killian Barton, he wants to know if visors were tested, and I'll add on to that, would you test visors?
We haven't actually tested any yet, but you wouldn't see anything except the aerosol just flowing straight around them.
Yeah.
It's just this aerosol has the particle size is quite small, is mostly between 3 and 10 microns. And at that size, they're so light, the particles, that they'll flow around obstacles. They'll just follow the stream of the air. It has to be quite a sharp corner for them to impact and crash into a surface. So for nearly all situations with the visor, they won't capture this kind of aerosol here. They will capture spit and things if you're talking very loudly, the big drops that come off your lips, and the visors will catch that, but they won't catch any of the aerosol that's coming from deeper in your throat or your lungs.
So I think it's a good question. You see these being used in different places, and
well, can I just say, Danielle, sorry, so we had looked at this early on in terms of the likely use of visors. So in CIT, we made mask wearing mandatory very early on. I think we were one of the first institutions, if not the first, to make it mandatory for anybody on campus based upon the work that we were doing in this group. But we also rejected the use of visors as an alternative to a face mask on the basis that the evidence early on, and it's one of the reasons that Stephen kind of pointed out why we haven't spent a lot of time looking at visors. They just reflect, they redirect the flow. They don't really frustrate the flow. They're just not good, and indeed they can be dangerous if used inappropriately. If somebody is standing over you with a visor and they're breathing down on top of you, it's really not good. It's really not a good thing to use. It's only the spit side of things. You will see in a medical situation, people use a combination of visors and masks. In part, that's to prevent material coming towards the face as distinct from going outwards. In fact, that's the primary function. In case it's something, it could be a bacteria, it doesn't all have to be around COVID, it could be something else. And that bacteria could maybe get into your eyes, and then it gets into your system. So visors is something that doesn't frustrate the path of the aerosols, and we now know that they're important. Can I just say one other thing? Because I mentioned about early on, we weren't sure of the transmission routes for COVID-19, but the primary transmission route for COVID-19 is airborne. I mean, it's why we now talk about smaller numbers of people gathering together and trying to minimize that, because it's that transfer of your aerosol that is really a problem. And it's really a problem because you can be very careful with your hand washing, and you can be reasonably or very careful about touching other people or whatever, or touching surfaces, but you can't stop breathing. It's impossible for you to stop breathing. So you are going to be generating aerosols, and if you have the virus, there will be some of those with a viral load. Minimizing that, that's a really important thing that you have to do in it, and that's also why we're so interested in the masks side of things.
Absolutely, but I mean, even to complement that, Niall, you know, the image that was produced highlights the importance of a mask, and also highlights the importance of a mask that fits appropriately. So, you know, a visor in and of itself
Could show you the difference between a mask on his nose.
is not.
I was actually thinking the same thing. I'm like,
for you,
after doing this,
type of fitting mask you can possibly get.
Yeah,
Like,
I remember we did send you about 500 or 1,000 photos of masks hanging off someone's nose, but you didn't use them.
Yeah, that'd be great, Stephen.
But doesn't it drive you crazy though when you go into a shop now, or you're like walking down the street, you see people just like with their mask either like hanging around their chin or just their nose sticking out? Like, it's just, especially after seeing this kind of a thing.
Well, think of the way that the breath gets out of you. It's got two mouth and your nose. If you frustrate it getting out your mouth, unless you got a blocked nose, it's going to come out your nose.
Look at that.
It becomes kind of almost obvious when you think about it.
Yeah. It comes straight out of your nose.
Yep.
Small
Path of least resistance. So.
It's the same breath, and that difference you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a relatively small leak you're getting at the top there.
Yeah.
So it's a great question, by the way. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, that was a very good question from Killian. And actually, the other question I'll give to Liam, because you were touching on the funding and research and things. And the question here from Rob says, some people say that we need to demonstrate what research will deliver before getting funding. So do you think that studies like this disprove this stance?
Yeah, I would certainly think so. And I think I don't think there's any problem with assessing the value that comes from research. I don't think any researcher of good standing would question that. But I do think you have to be careful about assuming or suggesting that research needs to be, you know, demonstrably valuable beforehand. I think you will find a mixture of research that gives you solutions to problems that are very well known and that are really good or are quite specific to a particular person or a company or a group of people. But a lot of the really good research, and when you dial it back, has come from the basic fundamental principle of curiosity. What happens if I do this? And in some sense, if you want to be really simple about it, it's the way we all learned when we were small, when we were children. We tried something, it didn't work, or it went badly, or it worked really well, and we learned from it. You know, so that was part of the actual process, even of human development. So to suggest, I think that to go that far to suggest that the research needs to be almost viable before you start it is probably too far for me. I think you need a good balance, and I think that balance is making sure that we have value in research, but also allowing curious people to look at problems which may not be obviously beneficial to us straight away, but where a lot of the technology and a lot of the solutions, like in this particular case, can ultimately be applied in different areas and will show us benefits in the long term. I think investment in research, in my mind, is never a bad investment.
Very good point.
Well, I can certainly say on my part, Liam, when I was a young individual, I took apart my father's stereo system. Let's just say none too pleased. I did put it back together, and it did work again.
And you learned something along the way.
It was a great experience, and I'm not suggesting anyone does that, by the way. Okay, but yeah, I mean, you learn by experience, but you also learn by investigating.
Absolutely.
I remember that story, right? He kind of forced you to put that back together on your own.
Yeah. Very forced me to get it up and running again.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so I think that's it. All we have for questions from the chat here, but I just wanted to give everyone, we only have a few minutes left for the top of the hour. So can we just round robin and kind of give your final thoughts and final words for the night, and maybe just answer this final question: are masks effective? What do you think? So we'll start off with Niall. You started our conversation, so would you like to start the end here?
Sure. Well, the evidence is overwhelming. Masks reduce the ability of aerosols to get from your lungs out into the general environment. They also protect you in the other direction. I noticed that the Center for Disease Control in the US updated their evidence recently in the last week. One won't maybe read huge amounts into that, or maybe one might read into the timing of some of the updates. But they work in both directions, and the dynamics of how aerosols move around makes sense. I think it's still really important, and it's something that we've talked about in the team, that and I said it at the outset, but I am going to say it again, the difference between wearing a mask over your face and over your nose and your mouth is enormously different to not wearing one or to wearing one badly. We're looking at fit, but I wouldn't want anybody to think I heard there was some issue with masks. Even a poorly fitting mask that covers your nose and your mouth will be potentially hundreds of times better than you're just talking alone. So if people are gathering, then wherever there's an opportunity, where isn't there an opportunity, you should wear a mask as much as possible when you're in a situation where there's a possibility for your breath to reach somebody else. And my final point will be ventilation. We know is also important in relation. We haven't talked about that. We've done some research in CIT on the ventilation side of things. That's not particular to this group or team that we're talking with tonight, but the ventilation, the idea being, of course, that the ventilation, the air removes the aerosols and minimizes the chance of them getting to you. But rather than rely on that solely, it's better to start off by generating the minimum number and then using ventilation to even disperse those further. From an astrophysicist point of view, I would say it's not rocket science. It's pretty clear, because this is a respiratory driven disease. There are lots of diseases that aren't respiratory driven. This one is. So in this instance, a mask is efficient. It will reduce your risk of contracting or spreading the disease. And so wherever it's possible, whoever can should wear them in any situations where they can, literally their breath can reach somebody else. It will help.
Liam or Stephen, would you like to, from the...
Yeah, I think, and it's pretty relevant here actually, when we were looking, and maybe you were involved in the conversation, when we were looking at the images to select for the competition, one of the things I mentioned was that my feeling was that the best image doesn't need a caption. So that you could look at the image and that you would understand exactly what the point that was trying to be conveyed was. And I think this is the dictionary definition of a picture tells 1,000 words. You just need to look at it and you can clearly see that masks are good.
And actually, thanks for that, because I actually forgot to mention that was one of the things that when we did go back and forth in the conversation, that was one of the things that I pointed out, was that there were a lot of good images. And there were a lot of other ones that Stephen had done with different types of masks as well. And one of the points that I made was that those were fantastic, but they would need a little bit more of like a description or a caption to go with it. And I wanted something that could speak for itself and had a message on its own. And I thought that was really important. So yeah, thanks for that one, Liam. And Stephen?
Yeah, so often when you're spend your whole career doing science, you're used to making decisions based on numbers and graphs and quite abstract concepts, but there's never a substitute for seeing something with your own eyes. And I hope you've been able to get some perception of what it's like to see that with the webcam, with all its limitations. And certainly when you're in the lab here looking at all this, the aerosol plume and billowing out into the whole space, it's not a question. It's completely obvious that everyone should be masking up as much as possible.
Can I ask, before I just go on to Alan though, because you're in there all the time in the lab and you're seeing this all the time, do you feel different when you walk past people like outside or in a shop or in even just like in the university and things like that, because you're physically seeing with your eye what the aerosol looks like coming out of someone? Do you think about things differently when you're in?
You do. So seeing how the aerosol moves even in a confined space like in the lab, if you're doing this for an afternoon, the air does get a bit smoky. It's just sodium chloride aerosol, it's just salt, so it's not harmful, but it does hang around in the air for a long time. And you see your experiment you did 10 minutes ago, the plume will come back around the lab and you'll find it coming back into the laser again. So it gives you an appreciation for just stepping back a meter or 2 meters. If you're in a confined space, it's really not going to help you much. And the mask is what's going to give you the most benefit there.
Yeah, I think even for my own self, the thing about COVID in general has made me much more aware of like people breathing on me, being in confined spaces and like airplanes and buses and that kind of thing has made me feel like a little bit like, oh, I don't know. It's actually seeing that you just see how much actually comes out of a person. It's been very enlightening, I guess. And so speaking of light, Alan, we'll go over to you and we want to give your final thoughts on the experiment.
Sure. Absolutely. In the first instance, we haven't touched on obviously a number of topics, and maybe we can do some a follow-up session in due course or something.
It's a 1 hour show, Alan. We can't do it all, so we'll have to
load and all these kind of topics. The panel here have been part of a couple of different projects associated with standards in relation to masks and whatnot. The main takeaway is if you look at the difference between the masks and the mask and the non-mask image, it's extremely clear you wear a mask, because what you're doing is you're reducing the probability and the opportunity for the virus itself to spread. And that's what the main task is. It's you're trying to contain the actual virus itself, and masks play an extremely important role in that. Now, they're not the only role, as Niall touched on and Liam touched on, the likes of ventilation, and there are other techniques and other opportunities for us to do it, but masks play an extremely important part in it. And even if you're, for example, even if it stops one person from having to get tested, or one person, then it's worth doing, isn't it? In my opinion. So it's absolutely essential. And I think, we have gone through a number of months of difficulty, but the science is quite clear on this. Masks actually do significantly assist in the prevention of the spread of this particular virus. So yeah, definitely mask up, whether it's poorly fitted or brilliantly fitted, mask up. It'll 10%, 50%, 80%, 90%, whatever the percentage is in terms of transmission, it'll help. And if 10% helps and it stops one person from getting affected, then it's worth doing. So mask up, absolutely.
Very much so. That's a very important message. And I think everybody here is in agreement that the masks work for sure. So I hope that for everyone watching at home, that's your major takeaway from this talk tonight. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Thank you for your questions, and thank you to everyone that's here on our panel discussion tonight. Thank you, Dr. Niall Smith. Thank you, Dr. Liam Lewis. Thank you, Dr. Stephen Darby. Thank you, Alan Giltonen. thank myself. And thanks everyone for giving your time tonight. And anybody watching at home, make sure that you subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already, so that you get notified next time we do a live stream. You heard it from Alan. We've got lots of topics to talk about, so we'll definitely be doing more of these in the future. So I hope everybody enjoyed themselves, and have a good evening. Stay safe and wear your mask. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
And we